0.5%. Surprised that the lady in red wasn't there? Yes, that's almost accurate, but it's of course far too high. On the next slide, you can see the whole data set. This is from the Europol's report, and you can see across the ones highlighted there are the UK figures. You can't, it's far too small to see in detail, but if you go to the next slide, we'll see more. And you can see that in 2006, the number of Islams, proportion of Islamic tax was 1.2%, in 2007, 1.68%, in 2008, 0%, and I've given you the 2009 data just for laugh, which is 0.003%. Now, you might be saying, where on earth is all this terrorism I've been missing? This is data from Europol. Sorry?
You said carried out by Islamists, whereas previously you said threats.
Sorry, these are the numbers of failed, foiled, or successful. Is the definition.
Percentage of all attacks carried out. Whereas previously you were showing us the threats.
That's right. The previous data was the threats as given by the number of plots said to be in existence by the intelligence services.
Okay, so they're not the same thing.
That's right. It's not the same thing. No.
Thank you.
And this data here shows that this is the proportion of all attacks which were failed, foiled, or carried out, which were carried out by Islamists. So less than 1% of the actual numbers of attacks were carried out by Islamists. Just if you see the point there. And this data comes from Europol, as I said, but it's given to Europol, it's compiled by Europol from figures supplied by the member states of every European Union country. So it comes from the government. It's not figures that magically come from somewhere else. Okay, so if we go to the next slide. Okay, this is some definitions of the terrorism which is used in the Europol report. I guess what you'd expect, Islamists, either what they call home name or AQ, being Al-Qaeda, and then you've got separatist, which is the Scots again. And then you've got left wing, which is the rotary fraction in Germany, Action Direct in France, the communist cells in Belgium, etc., etc. So left wing. Then you've got right wing terrorism, far right neo-Nazi terrorism, and then special issue people. That's the animal rights people who don't wear leather shoes and the like. And that's the definitions used in the data. If you go to the next one, I'll show you a bit about what kind of other numbers there are. Now, what we did was we compared the numbers of attacks that there were in the UK. So if we looked at the UK data, the problem with the UK data is that the British government, the EU government, which wouldn't break down the attacks between the different types of terrorism. So there were 74 attacks in Britain one year, but they wouldn't say if it was the animal rights people or what it was. So we thought, how are we going to find this out? So we tried to ask the government, and they said, no, we're not telling you. So we thought, what about asking the police service of Northern Ireland? So we sent an FOI request to the PSNI, and they came back and they gave us reams of data about all the terrorist attacks that were in Northern Ireland, how many there had been, and the shootings that there had been, the bombings that had been, the incendiary devices that had been exploded. Frankly, it looked like anyone who barked in the night was included in their figures, but they gave us a huge breakdown of all the figures. So we were able to tell from that with the exception of 2 attacks in these 3 years, every other terrorist attack in the UK had been done by Northern Irish groups, either groups associated with republicanism or with loyalism in the North of Ireland. So we were able to show in these 3 years, you can see here, 2 Islamist attacks. I think one of those is, no, I forgot which one that is. But the 2 Islamist attacks in those 3 years, and over here, the Northern Ireland attacks. Now, if you compare the actual numbers of attacks, as given in the data here, with the next slide, you can see that what we did was we then went and looked at the press and to find out what kind of stuff there was in the press. So we looked for different kinds of terrorism in the press. So we had Islamist terrorism and Irish terrorism, and we looked in the press to see what there was in the same periods, and those are the search terms we used. We'll come back to those. If you go to the next slide, we'll see what 2 papers we looked at, just the usual ones. Next slide. There we are. It's the data. And you can see there that the kind of terrorism you get covered in the press is your left there, followed by Northern Irish separatists, right-wing animal rights. So the profile it gets in the press is completely different to the profile it's got in reality.
What are the numbers?
These are numbers of items in the press, so numbers of news stories for each of the years. Yeah, we don't do that. Right, now, so what I'm suggesting then is that there's a difference in the way in which real events are covered, and that you get much more press coverage on Islamist attacks than you do on Northern Irish attacks. Now, there's no necessary reason why that's a problem. I mean, the scale of the disjunction is perhaps interesting, but there's no necessary reason why the press shouldn't report some things that happen less, more often, if they're more unusual or more worrying. I think that's, to some extent to which that's the case. So what we then wanted to do was to look in detail at the plots which we knew about, because the government are saying, although not openly, they're saying off the record to the press, that there are 30 or 90 or 80 or 30 or 80 plots in action. So we wondered, well, what is a plot? What does a plot look like? If there's not lots and lots of arrests to show that these plots have gone down and people have been arrested, well, what is happening? So we looked at some examples of terrorist cases where there had been plots where people had been arrested and there had been stories in the press about it. So we looked, for example, at Operation Gamble, which was a plot allegedly to kidnap and behead a Muslim British soldier. And so you've got some headlines here. Over there, Al-Qaeda orders British beheadings. Al-Qaeda tries to bring Baghdad to Birmingham. Al-Qaeda behind the plot to behead soldier. And there was 6 months intensive surveillance. There was a raid which cost 10 million quid apparently. 4 people went arrested. 4 people released without charge. 4 charges of supplying weapons and finances abroad. I mean, not to do with Britain. And 1 charge for conspiring to abduct and kill a soldier. For conspiring, that was. Next slide. And then it transpired that not all the stories in the press have been true. It was alleged in the press that information had been leaked about this story to divert attention from the cash for honours scandal and the prisons crisis. The notion that 2 Muslim soldiers had been planned to be used as live bait was rejected as being fabricated. The notion of 25 soldiers in a mole within the British Army was rejected as being false. And the information provided almost entirely in these stories by Whitehall security sources. So it looked like that although there was someone who was arrested and charged with a conspiracy, the actual extent of the plot was much less than had been suggested at the beginning. Next slide. Then we have Operation Volga, which you might more readily remember as being the Forest Gate raid, when there was an alleged plot of 2 brothers in Forest Gate in East London who were claimed to be engaged in making chemical weapons, and the intelligence on this was so strong that there had to be an immediate raid. There was no time for surveillance, and so they raided in the middle of the night. 250, 300 Metropolitan Police officers at 4 a.m. in the morning. And you might recall that in the process, one of the 2 brothers who were arrested was shot at the time. Police fear bomb being moved. Police in toxic bomb hunts. No charges to Forest Gate victim. Diagram of poison bomb. Large raid. Okay? So you'll recall that there wasn't any chemical weapon found. Then you might also recall, next slide, that there was an allegation about who had been involved with the shooting. And some shall we say police sources, or shall we say intelligence sources, plural. Some sources said that the person who had been shot by his brother. And that turned out to be, what's the word, a lie. Actually, he was shot, as you'd expect, at a raid at 4 a.m. every morning by police. No chemical weapons were found. And then the slap in the face in this story is that after all of this is revealed to have been simply a farrago of nonsense, and people are released, then a story is released to the press that one of the people involved had a child pornography on his computer. That's it. The whole thing's ripped up again. They might not have been involved in chemical weapons, but they had child pornography, which of course was a lie too. And so they had to acknowledge that wasn't true. Before we go on, I think I'm a bit wary of using the sociological term lie, because you can understand that sometimes these things are a bit complicated, and in the heat of the moment, if they are panicked into thinking there's a chemical weapon and they have to go in, then if you're in the police or if you're the civil servant making a decision on the minister and you get this intelligence and you panic and you've got to make a decision, then once the decision's made, all the other things kind of happen automatically. The police have got to go in there and, even if they don't believe it, they've got to act as if it's real. Just like when you go through security every time at the airport. I mean, all the people who are in there, half of them have got jobs because there's a terrorist threat, because they wouldn't otherwise be some of the security staff. And they may, they're not being paid great wages, they may not believe all the stuff that they're told about security threats, and they may believe, like I do, that this is largely a farrago dreamt up by people who don't really know what's happening in the world. But nevertheless, they've got to act as if it's real. We've all got to act as if it's real. We can't go through and say to the security guards, come on, this is ridiculous. A bottle of water, what am I going to do? and of course they know, but the rationale for this is that if you were a dedicated terrorist, you could take quantities of more than 100 milliliters of liquid through security, and in the course of a 5-hour plane